Hello and welcome to another Tech Tuesday. Last year we asked the @Chat community what topics they wanted covered. You asked us you'd like to know a little bit more about Dragon Naturally Speaking. Well, you asked, and today we've got a session where we're actually going to be looking at it. And joining me today is Nick, an @Chat team member and an expert user.
Hi, it's great to be here and I'm looking forward to sharing some of my knowledge and tips with you all.
Great. It's so nice to have you here with us again, Nick. All right, so straight into questions from our @Chatters. Janelle asked, do you know if there are any other programs that recognise other people's voices? As I believe Dragon is the only one with a one-person voice. Well, what do you think, Nick?
There are several smaller versions, like Google Docs have their own version, but the limitation with that is it only works with Google Docs. Then you've got the built-in one for Windows 10.
Cortana, yep.
That does do voice recognition and dictation, but it's not as accurate.
We mustn't forget the big Apple one that everybody also knows about, Nick.
I'm not an Apple user, so I kind of occasionally forget about Siri, but she is out there.
She is out there, and that's probably the one that most people are common on and using and aware of, because it's pretty much how people use their phones. And if you're a Mac user, it's been sitting there in the back of that operating system for a little while too. But and Siri's not bad, and it's pretty accurate. But for the work and versatility, that's where you're looking at something like Dragon, I think. Wouldn't you agree?
I would.
Yeah. So thanks for the question, Janelle. And actually we have a few questions from Jess. So thank you, Jess. It's so lovely that you've actually come with all these interesting questions. So Jess's first question was, can it be used with slurred speech or sound errors, and will it learn specific voice very well? On
the learning of voice, we'll go there first. It does learn voice reasonably well. One of the benefits of the new Dragon is that it's plug in and go, so the more you use it, the more it picks up as well.
It's kind of like filtering the language that you use the most, and then building that sort of vocab around what you're most likely to put up. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I also find it has the option where you can put customizations in, so that if you have certain words or words that haven't been recognised, for example, my name, Ivana, in the way it's spelled is unusual. So the first couple of times that it was used, it didn't pick it up. And in fact, it's come up with some very amusing versions, but I can actually put that in and save that as part of the vocab setting, I guess is a good way of
I actually have that same problem with my last name. And being a long Italian name can come up with all kinds of weird and wonderful variations of it. But again, it will learn it over time.
Yeah, it does. And it's like we say with anything new, any piece of technology, anything that you have to do, it can take months, and you got to put in the time if you want to get a result. And it might sometimes feel like you might go, it should just pick up and I should just do everything. But it's got to learn it, don't you agree? It's definitely much better than the earlier versions. There is no question about that.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, it is learning a language.
Yeah.
Your language. So it's going to take some time.
Yeah. That's right. So moving on, Jess was also very curious about the differences in the professional versions. So probably one of the points is that the software company, Nuance, back at the end of last year, they sort of changed how they were going to classify the software. Beforehand you had, and they've done that, which probably makes sense over time, you have your home and student version, then you have your professional versions, then your medico-legal versions. And last year, up until like September, October, they were running something called premium and professional, and then they've sort of got rid of premium. So it's now just professional.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so what have you found with the professional version?
Because I've used both premium and professional. with the professional, which differs from the premium, is that you can use it on other software, not just Windows or Microsoft Word or Windows 10, but you can use it on Outlook if you've got Outlook. I also know it works with Gmail, and things like, I use it quite a bit on PowerPoint. I haven't used it a lot with Excel, but I know it does work with Excel. So it's much more
broad, would you say?
Broad, yeah.
Yeah.
With the programs it can work well with.
Yeah. I mean, the company has acknowledged that people still have the older versions. So often what happens with them is that they offer a discounted option to upgrade, or a patch they might call it, where you can sort of use it on a different system. And so some of the things in the professional version as well is that I think a lot of people like is the whole idea that you can do custom commands. So the idea is that it's not just the option, Dragon isn't just about straight dictation into like emails or into a Word document. A lot of people use it to drive and operate their computers. And so, or to edit their work. So the idea that you can create a command to do certain actions, that shortcuts basically, is quite a nice feature for people. And there's actually, people have put up on websites, shorts, there's a whole community out there that people have created shortcuts for themselves. All right, so another wonderful question from Jess is there training to be able to use voice commands? Currently using speech to text on the iPad, but I don't know how to do some of the things or correct where we are going. So I have a mammoth task of editing at the end. Now, you mentioned that in your thespian moment, you like to write scripts and stuff.
Yes.
So how do you find going around having to edit work?
Editing, it can be a bit tedious at times, but I mean, that's editing in general, I find. But with Dragon, you can just use a command called correct, and you'll come up with, it'll correct the word you want to create, and it'll come up with about 4 or 5 versions of.
It has a little pop-up box. And that actually shows you pick the number. So
editing has, the editing definitely has improved.
I mean, the other thing is there are suppliers out there in Australia that will do some training as well for people. So if you require a little bit more support and training, you can access that. They do something called remote login. So they're kind of watching you from the other side, and then they're giving you that feedback as well.
And I know Norris does have training videos on YouTube, which I've used quite often. So there are different avenues of learning on how to use the product as effectively as possible.
And you can have something in the beginning, I reckon, like a little cheat sheet next to you, or just up next to the computer screen that just gives you some of your key ones as well. And quite often with the new version, they have a tips screen, and you can call on what can I do or what can I help, is it called? That it also pops up some of those command options. And I think what happens is you kind of work out the ones you would use the most in whatever it is that you're doing. So the final question from Jess
is about background noise. How does Dragon work with background noise? I found that it can work with any microphone, desk, even the built-in one with in your computer. However, I found to limit the effect of background noise, because background noise can slow it down significantly when you're dictating. Can also give you some really interesting and entertaining sentences, especially if you've got kids around and they're running around having fun. come up with some really interesting sentences. But so I found that it looked best to use it in as quiet room as possible. However, if that's not possible, a headset with a boom mic works wonderfully because the sound doesn't have as far to travel. So therefore, the effect of background noise won't affect Dragon accuracy as much.
Just to expand on what Nick was saying, there are different ways that you can dictate or operate the software. Most people use the headsets because, again, it's accurate every single time because you stick it on your head. The microphone is in a good position that is pretty easy to replicate every time. But some people will use hand microphones, pretend like you're singing into it, and they're good for short things. But as Nick pointed out, again, it's a case that you're stuck holding this microphone, so it might not work for everyone every time. Table microphones, again, so like little ones that sit on your table, like the Yeti or ones that you might plug into your computer, they're good, but again, you've got to bear in mind that you've got a bit of a distance away from your microphone. But again, if you have someone who physically, so I had a little lady come in and she had quite bad arthritis, so for her, she physically was never going to get that on her head and then activate the microphone. So we had to go with one that was on a wiggly sort of gooseneck mount mic, so that could be set up for her permanently at her computer, so that she could just walk up or drive up to her computer depending on what she was doing, and it was just ready to go. And it also meant that the button was on her down lower, so she wasn't having to raise her arms above the table. So again, it is about finding what's going to work for you guys. Some people use dictaphones and voice recorders, but again, I reckon that's probably your medico-legal area because it's more of a transcribing stuff. But again, you got to think about it. If you're doing a task that, like emailing or you're writing a document, you kind of probably aren't doing it in a noisy environment. You're kind of doing it because you're wanting to concentrate. Sometimes you can't if you have kids running in and out, or
you're in an office situation.
Yeah, and that's what's quite nice. And what's nice about having the headsets is that it kind of also, it sort of helps you with really focusing and concentrating too. So for a lot of people, that's quite a nice feature.
Yeah.
Did you agree?
I would.
All right, so we get asked this question quite a lot of people, and Karen asks, I'd like to know if there's any other funding options for people who aren't on the NDIS yet. You happy for me to take this one?
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I feel like we talk a lot about funding here. All right, so there are a couple of options for people out there. So I'm just going to sort of break it down. So if people are students or children, they may be able to request funding through the school system, depending on if they are public or private or Catholic ed. Best thing to do is just to double check, because there is, and also in the past sometimes people have applied through Variety for children under 18, but they were sort of on hold for some of those things. People who are at university or TAFE or secondary studying situations, they can often approach at those organisations. They'll have someone like a disability support officer, I guess is a good way of describing it. So they would support people who are looking at those sort of options, and often they will be able to get licenses to go on computers that obviously is used for the time that the student is studying with the organisation, like the university TAFE or whatever. But obviously once you leave, you'd be responsible for sourcing that software yourself. People who are in the workplace, so sometimes people will contact agencies like Job Access or Work Assist, and they're designed to support people who are either returning to work after whatever situation, or people with a disability who, in terms of enabling them to participate in the workplace, might need to look at alternative pieces of software. So that's a good place to start, is going through that as well. So the other thing as well is that this is probably more, I'll say now, more WA based. Just to clarify that, is that we have lottery grants here in WA under Lottery West, and so that's sometimes for software, occasionally for hardware. So people will apply for a disability equipment grant, which may enable them to access something like software for Dragon, and accessory things like microphones. I will say that if people through their NDIS plans are looking at Dragon, when they put in the request, it might be worth building in a bit of time for some training and supports. Would you think that would be a useful way?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because I think that's the other thing is, while it is pretty much click and go and you can source all of that, if you have the capacity in when you're looking for funding to build a bit of support into that, it'll actually just make it much more user friendly for you guys in the end. So the only other grants which in WA we have is the community living and participation grants. But the best thing to do is check if there are any local or national ones in your states too. You can give some of those ILCs, they would probably have a better understanding of what's locally available in your area. And so finally, just a few useful tips before we go from my point of view is try and plan before you speak. Works the best of times.
Doesn't always happen.
No, it doesn't. Try and have your mic about, 6 inches away from your mouth. Try and speak your words carefully and try and use short sentences. Those would be my sort of tips. Would you?
I would. I think short sentences is quite a good one. I know it on the YouTube videos, they do say it works best with paragraphs, but honestly, if you've got voice issues and stuff like that, short, full sentences are usually the way to go. And look, even one, if you need to begin with, one word at a time. It's time consuming, but it'll really train the software on how your voice works.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's it from us today, and I hope you guys got some useful information, and thank you to all our chatters who sent in their questions, especially Jess. So if you have any further questions about it, please post below in the comments section and we'll answer them as best we can. A big thanks to you, Nick, because your expert advice is really great in this area.
No, thank you. It's been a lot of fun and I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.